Perfect.
Okay,
You're good to go now.
Okay, great. So the case for data markets in Canada. Thank you so much for the introduction, Harold. And again, I apologize for the glitches on my end. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I'm privileged to present my current research on data markets, and I thank Waterloo AI for this opportunity. So, in terms of my biography, I've been a faculty member in economics since 1999. My research has focused on evaluating the effects of public policies on behavior using advanced statistical methods. And currently, I'm using machine learning methods on a variety of public policy topics. I'm currently working on developing models that can predict daily COVID-19 cases with mobility data, using real-time survey responses to predict civil protests in developing countries, and identifying statistical methods that can forecast ER readmissions of heart attacks and strokes. And I'm also working on proposing optimal models of data governance. So the topic for today, data markets. Why would we care? What are data markets? And what do they mean for society? I think we are at a certain influx point just now in society. We're truly living in what can be termed as the data age. Different economic agents, consumers, firms, and governments are all producing massive amounts of information that can be stored and analyzed. Data generation is the result of a variety of online activities by individuals and businesses, most of which have considerable economic benefits. But there are also significant societal costs or social costs that policymakers are grappling with around the world. In other words, the issue is that big data has also led to big problems. The business benefits of big data have been reaped by large firms. And these large firms have been able to use predictive analytics, which have reaped them considerable profits. But there are also virtual monopolies with almost impenetrable barriers to entry because of massive data sets. These barriers to entry have resulted in lost innovation by smaller and agile entrants and extremely inequitable distribution of societal surplus. The Cambridge Analytica scandal has revealed another danger from the accumulation of massive amounts of information. How large data sets collected by a few organizations can be weaponized to impact public opinion and democratic outcomes. Here's my solution to the problem. In my current research, I've identified what I think is a framework for efficient data regulation based on 6 simple principles. And I propose that having data markets are the most efficient way to implement and abide by these principles. Number 1, establish individual property rights to data. Guarantee, well, let's put it this way, the individual using platforms, social media platforms, or just using the internet, they are creating data. So they own the data they create, guaranteeing data portability through basic machine readable files, retaining the free services enjoyed by users from digital platforms. We don't want big tech companies to stop providing free services to individuals, which have shown to have significant societal benefits. Assure the public that data sold by individuals are protected and not be acquired or used for purposes for which they have not been given explicit approval. Implement accountability for big tech firms if their social networks negatively impact society. And finally, encourage effective and innovative competition to big tech companies. So what has the federal government done? Currently, we have two bills, Bill C10 and Bill C11, which are being debated in Parliament. I don't have time to get into the details of these bills just now, but suffice to say that they're insufficient on many accounts. The key point is that while they allude to data portability, there's no regulation that mandates that whatever data are created by individuals through their use of digital platforms can then be easily downloaded into machine readable files. So markets as a solution, how do markets step into this gap? I predict that federal initiatives will not achieve desired outcomes because of glaring shortcomings, especially with respect to data portability. I suggest that regulated data markets have significant potential, and this is based on research done by computer scientists and economists. Such markets are inevitable, and I'll be getting to the details of them, and Canada should seize the opportunity of being a pioneer in their use, which would lead to significant innovation and economic opportunities. The idea of selling one's data might seem extremely controversial, but however, I will point to history, and so was the idea of markets for pollution during the 1960s. Now such markets are considered a spearhead in the fight for global climate change. And I propose that data markets are consistent in spirit with the idea of pollution markets, and I'll be getting into that. So think of a basic model. In economics, we think that the consumer's well-being or utility is defined by the consumption of goods. But I will turn that around a bit. I will say here that the consumer is the producer. The individual produces data through their choices that they can choose to share with firms. And this could be through the variety of internet and media-related services that individuals use on a daily basis through online activities. It could be restaurant or hotel or store reviews, emails, WhatsApp messages, social media posts, so on and so forth. This is the supply of data. The individual is the supplier of data. Why would people sell their data? With markets, a consumer maximizes a well-being function. They have utility from creating information, and the utility they gain is a function of the money, the return they'll be paid from creating information and creating content, minus the opportunity cost in terms of time away from leisure and from direct income generating activities. But more important, they also have a participation cost. The more information they supply, then the more they're vulnerable to cyber attacks and negative online activity, as exemplified by Cambridge Analytica. But what the consumer does, what the individual does, is they choose an optimal amount of they choose to supply an optimal amount of information based on the marginal benefit of being paid, which they equate to loss in leisure and also the incremental cost of being vulnerable to online attacks. But the government role is so important. A market can only exist if it is protected by property rights. Hence, the federal government must establish and guarantee that individuals own their data and have the right to sell their information. Further, they must minimize transaction costs to participation by mandating that individual data collected by firms can be downloaded in machine-readable formats, as is the case in Europe. The federal government can also develop regulations that facilitate secure online data sharing. This takes care of points 1 and 2 of the framework, establishing individual property rights to data and guaranteeing data portability through machine-readable files. The purchasers of data are the firms. And one class of purchasers could be financial institutions or large entities which want more data in order to do predictive analytics for their products or service offerings. Another class of firms may want to offer targeted advertising services, as does Google and Facebook. But here's the innovation I propose. Much like smaller firms, telecommunication firms, who can access the infrastructure of large entities, why can't we have a sharing agreement where smaller firms with their own innovative predictive algorithms can access consumers or individuals who are on Facebook, for example, and with their permission, of course, and then be able to also engage in predictive advertising all through Facebook or Google's platforms. So this would open up the market without unnecessary government intervention or regulation. And it should also not impact the flow of free and innovative services we see from big tech companies to individuals. But you're just creating an enhanced market. A third class would be data aggregators who would be successful in exploiting economies of scale in collection and predictive analytics. And they'd be able to offer these services to farmers, newspapers, many other establishments who face barriers to entry. In summary, a market for data based on data portability has immense potential to create innovation and fulfills point 6, encouraging effective and innovative competition to big tech companies. But the government needs to step in. Individuals, what I propose, and I emphasize, individuals should only be able to sell their data to firms that have a data license. In other words, such firms have clearly met conditions which show that they have the necessary infrastructure that can safely store individual data and protect it from cybersecurity attacks. They also need to be transparent in how they intend to use individual data. Imagine data exchange, where firms can put forward their need for data. And if someone likes that and can earn some income, they're willing to share their data with such a firm or an exchange which has data licenses. What I propose to you is crowdfunding or crowd data funding, right? There's no reason why that argument can't work, because if people then are engaged in contributing their data and helping firms, they have a say in how their data is being used. And that might have a domino effect in individuals demanding how Google and Facebook and big tech companies use their data as well. Here you see my basic thoughts. On the vertical axis, that's the price of data, R, as a function of the information people are willing to supply. On the horizontal axis, you see the quantity of information. So the demand curve for data is downward sloping. Firms would be willing to pay less the more data they have. Each incremental data unit may not aid them in the predictive analytics, so that's lower value. On the other hand, for individuals, what might work is a fixed fee for their data access. So you pay me a fixed fee in order to access my data, and depending on how much data of mine you use, you pay me a royalty. And so you see that upward sloping supply curve, which shows that an individual receives more income based on the number of times their data are used, which is efficient, but also compensates the individual based on the loss in privacy they experience by sharing more of their data. So this would arrive at a market equilibrium, I argue, with vast economic benefits. A market based on these principles would have active participation by purchasers and sellers and greatly assist in addressing some of the key concerns facing society today. How? Because it encourages and initiates the process of data democracy. I pose to you that many of the concerns and problems we face in society today is because of a lack of data democracy, which is a function of how transparent data are used, how it is shared, and so on. And this is important because data is the fuel for artificial intelligence. There exists considerable expertise in Canada in advanced statistical AI and cybersecurity research in the University of Waterloo, if I might give my institution a plug. Development of data markets could lead to significant innovation in software and app development, new products fueled by insights from advanced data analytics, and cutting-edge research from wider data availability. However, what would be required is significant cooperation between firms demanding access to data, academics pointing to the benefits in innovation, and governments crafting appropriate regulation. Research needs to be done to understand how individuals value their data and privacy and what pricing schemes could potentially work. Let me show you a picture which I think exemplifies the benefits of data markets and enhanced data sharing. This is research which I'm conducting with colleagues in the Department of Statistics and School of Public Health here in Waterloo. What we're trying to do, and we've been working for months on, is a model that can predict daily new COVID cases. And so far, we have met with success in Ontario. What you see in front of you are data from Ontario. We fitted a model and trained the model from April 1st to September 30th. The dependent variable here are the number of new cases. But what's fueling our predictive analytics are Google data. Google, with the pandemic, agreed to share their mobility data, which they collect from Google Maps, and they made it publicly available. And so the hypothesis we're testing is that whether or not new cases can be predicted with historical measures of population mobility. And if you look at the right hand of the diagram, you can see that our model is doing a really good job of predicting daily cases. We're probably just on average off by 8 or 9% from October 1st to December 31st. Extremely tight, but we would not have been able to develop this model and contribute to policy unless Google had agreed to share the data publicly. But this gives you an idea of the innovation which can be achieved by unleashing data and possibly through data markets. So in conclusion, data markets have the potential to address many policy issues relating to privacy and the framing of appropriate regulation. It is the obvious way to introduce competition in markets dominated by firms with massive economic power. Competition also results in innovation and a more equitable distribution of economic surplus. This is the right time to explore data markets. The emergence of 5G networks will facilitate the development of real-time markets where firms may put out requests for data. An evolved data market could have helped in addressing data shortages that significantly impacted policymaking during COVID. And I argue that there's still not enough data being generated for policymakers to make sound empirical-based decisions. Think of the type of government assistance or help that could evolve in a truly innovative manner. Data markets could help the government in targeted assistance for AI-based startups by financing data purchases needed as fuel for such companies. And again, it would be so easy with data markets where startups could simply point to the market, report the prices, and tell the government what type of data they would need. Data markets are coming. Governments had to play catch up, and they are still playing catch up with Bitcoin, Airbnb, and Uber. But think fundamentally, what fueled Airbnb and Uber? What happened is that these were surplus assets. People had an extra room in their apartment or in their home, maybe in the basement. Uber is fueled by people who are interested in gigs and had spare time. Similarly, data can be viewed as a surplus asset with enormous disruptive potential. However, disruptive technological innovation brings societal benefits, but can also have unintended consequences that are often left to governments. This should not be repeated in the case of data markets. In 1968, John Dales of the University of Toronto proposed markets in pollution rights, and that was considered incredibly controversial. How could we control pollution by selling rights to pollution? But now emissions trading markets have evolved to become a key policy tool to address the problem of global climate change. I argue that markets for data have similar potential in addressing some of the adverse consequences of our data-driven society, while unleashing significant innovation and perhaps more importantly, leading to data-based democracy. And I believe that there are reasons as to why Canada can be the epicenter of such change and truly produce world-leading innovation and development. So with that, I thank you and I conclude my talk, and I am very happy to share my slides if anyone wishes that.
Okay, Anindya, thank you so much. Very insightful talk. If you don't mind, where there's a few questions.
Please go right ahead.
So you started your talk at the beginning, and we've all heard the term big data. Do your best to put a definition of what you consider big data.
Well, I can go back to my first slide, and these are just massive amounts of data. And aside from this, not really giving a precise definition, which can easily be Googled, big data is basically data which is not being produced every day. In terms of, if you look at it, think of 500 billion tweets, 300 billion emails, 5 billion internet searches. All that are just massive amounts of information. And when I started my career, just again, I'm not trying to give you a precise definition, but when I started my career 20 years ago, a big data set was a spreadsheet file with maybe 100,000 observations. And now I'm working with data sets of surveys with 20 million observations. These data are being collected by firms in real time, and that is the best example, easy to understand example of big data, in my opinion.
Okay, great. So going with that now, so you make a proposal about the federal government, I want to say, use your word, should ... How do you think that comes to play? How does that talk get to the point where they're going to start really embracing it? Just kind of the similar challenges the pollution market faced.
What has to be done are more and more academics need to do work in this area. Talking about the benefits of data markets. So there has to be clear research which shows the benefits of such data. But then, as I said in my slides, what needs to be done is that academics and stakeholders, industry stakeholders, need to get together. We need to have conferences, we need to have seminars, and we need to let the government know that we think there's a lot of potential in these markets, and that they could have significant societal benefits. So it's all in the communication and coordinated communication with different stakeholders in society.
Okay, so Waterloo, the University of Waterloo was a forefront on the areas of intellectual property and ownership related, so that we were able to bring a new mindset to the academic community. How do you think a similar concept applies for what Waterloo's role could be on the data side?
I think that Waterloo can and should play a seminal part in this initiative. When you think about the incredible ecosystem out here within the university, in terms of engaging people from the social sciences and arts with the people in statistics, computer science, and all the technology fields, but more importantly, our connection to industry. Not only do we have large industry players here, which I think are very involved in data research and have a role to play in data markets. When you think, and it's not just the large firms, it's also the smaller entities, the startups, the incredible fertile ecosystem we have here in terms of companies coming up almost every day, but also harnessing data. We see that every day from our competitions, from velocity through the problem pitch presentations. I think that the University of Waterloo has an advantage in getting all the players together under one umbrella and making this pitch to government and society.
Okay, sorry, I was on mute there. I just said thanks again, Anindya. This is very insightful, and hopefully Waterloo AI can help continue your groundbreaking work as you push down this path.